Good morning. Our sermon this morning is entitled Our Called General Conference. And I hope you'll forgive us bringing hot tea up here. I think we're both nursing colds. I got one from my husband, and I don't know where yours came from.
I just don't want to be held responsible for yours.
Oh, my husband's been sick all week. So we want to share with you about this Call General Conference in a question and answer format. And we realize that sharing this information today may also bring about new questions for you. And we'd like to invite you to write those questions down, and you can ask either one of us in person or email questions to us. You could even send them to us now in the next couple days ahead of our Wednesday night session that we'll have here at the church at 7 o'clock. And we'd be sure to address those then together with a larger group. So we invite you to continue the conversation that we start today.
And if during our dialogue back and forth a question occurs to you, raise your hand or just yell out and say, "What about?" And we'll be happy to entertain as much as we can before the hour's out.
So the first question I want to raise today is, why are we talking about this? Why does it matter so much?
The Methodist Church has a general conference every 4 years. As I said, there are 12.5 million United Methodists around the world, and 860 delegates vote on the rule book that guides every United Methodist church. This conference that is meeting between the 23rd and the 26th of February has the potential to disrupt the life of the United Methodist Church more so than any conference in my lifetime. More so as much as the conference of 1844, when the United Methodist Church split north and south, so that this one denomination, national denomination, became two denominations because of the issue of slavery. The vote that's going to happen this next weekend has the potential to be that disruptive. That's why we wanted you to know.
Something that has the potential to be disruptive makes me concerned about when that disruption would occur. So what would the time frame be around that? Is it something that has an immediate impact, or is it something that takes a longer time to impact us? What's the time frame?
I'm learning about this as we do it. There are congregations who have been thinking about this coming conference for the last 5 years. And they have planned, if the vote of the conference doesn't go as they want, they plan to petition the United Methodist Church and to leave the denomination, taking their building and their assets with them. Which happens infrequently, but every year somewhere in the world that happens. This has a chance to be 20 to 30% of the United Methodist Church. There is a group of United Methodist pastors and lay people who have been working for the last 2 years creating a brand new denomination called the Wesleyan Covenant Association. And they have already written up the bylaws for a new denomination and a petition to take their property and begin a new denomination. And they may act as quickly as 1 month after the conference happens. And that could represent 10 to 20% of United Methodist churches around the United States. So between the new denomination starting and other churches wanting to go independent, the United Methodist Church as we know it could look quite different as a result of the vote. I'm thinking the best we can do is to wait a year after the vote to see what our options are. The vote is about some pieces of legislation that will be pieced together just like Congress puts together legislation through parliamentary procedure. So what gets voted upon, we don't quite know what it's going to be until the vote actually happens, which will be about a week from today. Once we know that, we can then take a year to decide how we're going to respond. But during that year, it's going to require incredible patience because there'll be congregations around us in Virginia who will be going independent or joining the Wesleyan Covenant Association, or there'll be individuals who say, "Oh, I don't like the vote, so I'm going to leave and go join another church." So the the importance, I say the urgency to be patient and work together to make sure we make a decision as a body and not just be picked off, fragmented individually, is really, really important. So I would say you'll start seeing disruption within a month of the conference. And it's best if we can be as patient as possible for the next year so that we have a deliberate process to decide how we're going to respond.
You used the phrase "the vote" a number of times.
Right.
On what is the conference voting? What is the big issue?
The big issue is around how the United Methodist Church welcomes the LGBTQ community. So there are some who want that community to, both sides, or all the ones involved, want members of that community to be welcomed in the pews of the United Methodist Church, to serve on every board, every committee, to be in positions of leadership. What they don't want, on the traditional side, is for members of that community to be able to be married by United Methodist clergy. And they don't want those members of that community to become clergy. So there's a group who wants to stop that from happening. There are other groups who want to make sure that that does happen and that barrier is removed. It's those two things. That is what all this is about.
The ordination
Ordination
and marriage.
and clergy performing same-sex marriages.
Okay. There was a group that was formed at the last General Conference called the Commission on a Way Forward. And that commission was tasked with presenting proposals to help deal with these issues.
Right.
So in my understanding, there are 4 general proposals that are being presented. Could you lay those out for us?
Okay.
Yeah.
You still with me? Everything okay? Okay. I'm going to lay out the 4 proposals in an oversimplified fashion. There are links in the bulletin where you can read each one of the proposals in great detail. But this is a simplified version. I'm going to do it kind of along a spectrum. This will be the more traditional approach, and this will be the more progressive approach. And I'll do the most traditional, the most progressive, and the 2 that are in the middle. So the most traditional approach is to do the language I just said. In 1972, we added to the Book of Discipline, the rule book of every United Methodist Church, this language. We find the practice of homosexuality incompatible with Christian teaching. That's the language that was added in 1972. The traditional model wants to keep that language and wants to enforce clergy and bishops having to live accordingly. That is, there would be no ordination of gays or weddings, same-sex marriages performed. And that's the traditional model. And those who want that traditional model have said, if that isn't what's passed, they will leave the denomination. Because they believe it's being faithless, and their call is to be faithful to the uncompromising Word of God. And that's what they want to do. There's another plan on the other end of the spectrum called the Simple Plan. What it wants to do is to remove the language that was put in the Book of Discipline in 1972 and let individuals and congregations decide for themselves how they will do it. So they're simply going to remove all of that anti-homosexual language. Those are the 2 extremes. I'm going to call them extremes, but those are the 2 sides. In the middle, there's one called the Connectional Plan. And what it would do is to create 3 United Methodist denominations that follow 99% of the same rule book, except on this issue. And on this issue, there would be a different rule book for a group that would be the traditional, a different rule book for the group that would be the moderates, and a different rule book for the group that would be the progressives. And every conference, every state would join one of those groups defined ideologically. So Virginia would join the traditional model or the moderate model or the progressive model. And if individual churches didn't agree with what their state organization did, they could opt out of the state's choice and join the stream of Methodism across the country of which they wanted to be a part. That one doesn't stand much of a chance to pass, by the way, but just to know it's one of the outside-of-the-box kind of thinking. The plan that is backed by the bishops of the United Methodist Church is called the One Church Plan. Part of the complication in the whole process is we as a country are united on this topic. We have a variety of opinions. And the delegates that are coming to the conference come from all over the world, including the nation of Africa that represents almost 25% of the delegates. And in many parts of Africa, homosexuality is an illegal practice punishable by death. So how they're going to vote on this is impacted by the culture from which they come. And trying to find one rule book that covers the entire world is a challenging thing for us. The One Church plan would say that every conference, that's about a statewide organization, gets to pick who gets ordained. So that decision's left to them. Every minister decides whose wedding they're going to perform. They're not forced to do any wedding or prohibited from doing any wedding. And every congregation will vote on what kind of wedding can be performed in their sanctuary. So the One Church plan would have 3 decision-making points to try to keep all of the boards and agencies of the United Methodist Church still in place. The episcopacy and how everything works would still stay the same, except for this is how these decisions would be made. Those are the 4 plans: traditional plan, simple plan, the connectional plan, and the One Church plan.
Well, who gets to...
How'd I do?
You did pretty well.
Okay.
That's good. Who gets to vote on these issues, and how were they chosen?
Again, it's about 868 delegates for the 12.5 million United Methodists. Once a year, the Methodists in Virginia and in every state have something called a conference. It meets in the summer. And there are 2 or 3 delegates from this congregation who go, and the clergy go. And there we vote on the delegates who are going to General Conference to write the rule book. Virginia gets 22 delegates, 11 clergy, 11 laity. So it's 22 delegates out of all the churches in Virginia. And so we, last summer, voted on the people that will be going to this General Conference.
It's my understanding that we'll have the names of those persons, right, on Wednesday night.
On Wednesday night we have,
And
I'll have the list and
see
the
who they are.
email addresses if you want to write to them or get to know anything about them.
And also, those 4 plans that we shared with you are only part of what will be before the conference. There will be a wide range of other proposals presented as well.
Yeah. Churches and individuals have presented 68 different plans. So when the delegates meet in St. Louis on the 23rd, part of what they'll do is divvy up those different plans to plenary groups, small groups, that kind of will work on whether they're constitutional or not, and do they want to change them. Some of those plans won't make their way out of committee, and only a few of the plans will make their way onto the floor of the conference, where they, under parliamentary procedure, will go through iterations and changes and amendments and additions, so that we can't know right now exactly what will be voted upon, because it's this living organism that will change things on the spot.
That sounds a little bit like Congress.
It works very much the same way.
In some ways.
You can think of the General Conference as our Congress. We have a judicial council that functions like our Supreme Court, and the office of the bishops function much like the executive branch. The United Methodist Church and the government of the United States were formed during the same era, so they have some incredible similarities.
So do we have something like C-SPAN for the United Methodist Church so we can watch the proceedings?
It's just like that, but not as interesting. So the United Methodist Committee on Communication will be televising this live. And Jason will also have his podcast. We've got links in the bulletin, so you can go watch it online if you want to, and also more information about what will be voted upon.
What if we disagree with the results of the vote as individuals or as a church? We're not all ready to retire. Ha ha.
You know, like under that smile, people think you're really nice. But you have this wicked sense of humor. But go ahead.
I had to bring it up. What do we do if we disagree with whatever the result is, as a family, as a church? What do we do with that?
You and I disagree on stuff.
Yeah.
We in this congregation disagree. There's nobody that went through a litmus test before you joined Aldersgate United Methodist Church. I didn't ask you, can you raise your right arm and affirm this body of faith statements? It's just not how we've organized ourselves. Hillary Rodham Clinton and George W. Bush are both United Methodist. I don't think they go to the same church, but we're a real diverse denomination. We have people from every kind of perspective, conservative and liberal and libertarian, and everything is part of who we are. We haven't defined ourselves as being united in belief, but united in practice, and the practice is of love. That's how we define ourselves. So we will have a difference of opinion. That's why this feels a little odd to us, that we think as if we all have to be exactly the same. And part of it's participating in the polarization of the nation. That's going on at the same time. You know that now when people are looking to move to new communities, one of the things they do is not just look for who has the best school or the best library, who has the best recreational facilities. They look at the congressional voting bloc to see if they're going to be surrounded by people who voted the way they do. We're a more polarized nation than ever, and so it just shows up in all kinds of places, and it's showing up here. So if the church votes in a way that you don't agree, there are going to be clergy who want to leave because it didn't go the way they wanted. There are going to be churches that want to leave, and there'll be individuals. And what I'm hoping for us is that we are committed to each other and say we're going to stick around and learn with each other what are our options. Let's pray together and decide what kind of church we want to be. Because it's just easy to get picked off and fragmented when things don't go the way you want. Like we're all kind of hyper-sensitized to noticing when a referee makes a bad call in a ball game, right? It's like, you didn't get that right. We just immediately respond with this sense of injustice. And so on this topic, I think there's this hair trigger inside of all of us to be angry because whatever decision was made wasn't the one we think it should be. But the life of this community is broader than that, I'm hoping, is broader than that decision. So in the same way, I'm more than a bit uncomfortable with 868 people making a decision that impacts the life of the church here. I want us to do a grassroots approach where we're talking to each other and everybody has a vote and everybody has a voice, and we're constantly communicating about what the choices are. Now, I don't know what those are going to be until after they take a vote. But once that's known, we'll have a conversation like this again. And we'll keep talking for the next year about what's the best way for us to respond. Sticking together for the sake of the ministry that we share is a really big deal. And I hope we'll be patient and let it work its way out with us.
It could be a tricky time. It depends on how we look at it, for a new pastor to be coming in at the end of June. If we're in the midst of uncertainty or change, which doesn't necessarily have to be negative, change doesn't have to be that way, but what does that look like for us as a church, for new leadership to be coming in when there is this uncertainty?
We saw our associate pastor leave last summer, and everybody in this room knows we traded up. Wouldn't you agree?
That's not true. No.
And when a new senior pastor comes in, there's going to be a person that brings new energy, new ideas, new bag of tricks, because what we're going to need is to work really hard. Now, it would be comfortable if I were here, right? But being comfortable isn't probably what we need next. What we need is energy, ideas, a way of grabbing people, a way of engaging people in the practice of their faith, a way of starting new ministries. It's not a time to pull back, it's a time to expand. And a new voice should be helpful to energize the place. And that's my prayer, and that's what I think will happen.
Well, then how do we as a church navigate these next several months? Joe read for us our scripture today from Ezekiel about the Valley of Dry Bones, and we're in the midst of a sermon series called The Anchor Holds, talking about how we can be steady in the midst of uncertainty. And who is it that makes us steady, and who is it that helps us to learn to navigate those waters? So how does Ezekiel's message speak to today?
Ezekiel writes at a fascinating time in the time of Israel. You know that centuries earlier, Israel had been a powerful, large country. I'm using two hands because they had a kind of civil war. It wasn't a war, But they developed, this one nation became two countries. The northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. And they never reunited. Once they separated, they never came together again. The United Methodist Church in 1844, over the issue of slavery, voted to separate. And there was a northern United Methodist Church and a southern United Methodist Church. And they reunited in the first half of the 20th century. But Israel never reunited. The northern kingdom engaged in bad political behavior and ended up being taken into captivity. 10 tribes in the northern kingdom went into captivity, and they never returned. They were called the 10 lost tribes of Israel, never to be seen again, disappeared. And you're left with just the southern kingdom. The southern kingdom engages in the same foolish political alliances that leads to them being taken captivity too. When they're in the foreign country, they rebel. And in the middle of their rebellion, that nation that has exiled them goes back to Israel and razes the place to the ground, destroys every house, destroys the temple. Now, the destruction of the northern kingdom, that happened 150 years earlier, and they disappeared. Now the people in the southern kingdom, whose country has been destroyed, believe that their fate is as awful as the northern kingdom, that they will never be seen again. That the tradition of Israel will be gone, the tradition of Abraham and Sarah, of Moses and Miriam, the work of the prophets will all be lost. The nation will be lost. The temple will be lost. Everything they love will be lost, never to be seen again. That's what that image of dry bones is all about. That there was all of this army that now is lost. They have no flesh. They have no breath. They are just bones. There's no actual valley of dry bones. This is just a metaphor Ezekiel is using, or a hallucination Ezekiel's having. Ezekiel's a wild character. I don't know which of those it is. But God says, can these bones live again? And Ezekiel, it doesn't say, well, of course, or that's crazy. Ezekiel knows to be quiet and just says, it's up to you. And God says, tell the dry bones they're going to live. And so he speaks. And there's this incredible image of the dry bones beginning to shake. The toe bones connected to well, you know that song. And the bones refine themselves. The right head finds the right neck, and the right hip finds the right thigh. And all the bones come together, and then they get covered in cartilage and muscle and skin. And then God says, they're not alive yet. Call the four winds from all over the world to blow over it. And it reminds you of God making Adam out of the dust of the earth. And God, when he makes Eve, goes and takes the bone from Adam's rib, and out of bone makes the match, the one. And Adam says, you are the bone of my bone. Well, it happens again, bone of bone. The bones come together and breath comes into them, and this whole army gets raised up. That's what Ezekiel proclaims to the people of Israel who are afraid they have no future. And within less than a generation, that group leaves Babylon and goes back to Israel. And there they rebuild the temple. They rebuild their homes. They rebuild their country and their culture. And it's out of that country that Jesus Christ is born. God can do incredible things. We don't know. Sometimes we have to say what Ezekiel said, Lord, I don't know. It's up to you. But my prayer is that we speak the words of life to a whole lot of people moving here, or who already live here, who are just looking for a God to put their faith in, to have their lives revived by the Spirit of Jesus Christ. And we know that story, and we can tell it incredibly well. It's not time to pull back. It's a time to advance.
So it's ultimately a message of hope.
I think so.
A message of resurrection, a message of God bringing life when we thought there was no life.
Yeah, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
It's not easy. God's raising up an army, and I would rather God just maybe we just would rather lay down like dead bones and say, I'm done. I'm
Is
tired.
that retirement?
So you look at me and you immediately think of the valley of dry bones.
Well,
But there will be people who want to do that, who just want to give up. But God has some other thing in mind. And it will take more urgency and more attention and more work. But the work is worth doing. It's powerful stuff. And when we do it, we find ourselves invigorated. I think it's God's Spirit blowing over our lives and filling us with the very power of Christ's resurrection.
And that in itself is reason enough to keep going. And not only keep going, but to look forward to a future, not knowing yet what that future will be. Trusting God and God's breath to breathe life into the midst of it.
You have any questions? His question is there any possibility that at the end of the vote, nothing changes? Some would say there's a 50-50 chance that's exact, because legislation can be like that they can't get a majority. I do believe the Wesleyan Covenant Association, if that were the case, the Wesleyan Covenant Association has so much momentum, they will leave and form a new denomination. Almost no matter what the vote is. I think that will happen. It'd be best to look them up themselves, the Wesleyan Covenant Association. They want to be an Orthodox Wesleyan organization, and their views are in a line with the traditional views I laid out. That's how they would define themselves. The Wesleyan Covenant Association is all I think it's only in the United States, but it's all across the United States. And there will be congregations that align themselves with the United Methodist Church, and there'll be congregations that align themselves with the Wesleyan Covenant Association over the next year. And I think it'll be thousands in both. It won't be a handful, it won't be a dozen, it'll be thousands. Do the bishops have veto power? No.
They don't even have vote, right? Do they? They can't vote.
They do not have a vote in this. It's only the delegates who have the ones that were elected. The bishops will preside, but they don't have a vote. Joe?
Are any of the voting delegates from our congregation?
No. Like I said, there are only 22 from across the state of Virginia. None from Aldersgate. And when they go, they don't go to represent a group. They go to represent themselves. So when they go, they vote their conscience as opposed to representing some group of which they're a part.
I'm certain that everybody's read the Washington Post today on the Archbishop and character. It's been about 300 or 400 years since the Catholic Church has in fact defrocked a cardinal of the Catholic Church. So we're facing some of the same challenges perhaps that we are in the United Methodist Church. A few years ago, there was a slogan going around to all the churches of Christianity, and I would give two pastors the question, as the expression of WWJ, what would Jesus do?
I think it's what would Jesus do is a good question for each of us to answer, and I'm not going to answer it for you, but I will let you. I'll let you pray, and when we have from the conference what our options are, then we can begin asking how do we as a congregation respond. I don't know what options they're going to give us. You brought up the scandal, which is more than a scandal, but the horrendous behavior of some Roman Catholic priest. It's a horrendous thing. It's a horrendous thing. Any others? If you have more questions, you can write them down. You can send them to us. We'll be here for as long as we need to be on Wednesday night to answer every question that we can, and we'll do it together. You doing okay?
I am.
I hope you're feeling better.
Thank you. I do want to leave us with a message of hope, because I do think that's ultimately where we are always. When we are persons of faith, that we are persons who lean into the image of the kingdom, persons who lean into this God who holds us, no matter what it is that's going on.
In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.